Okay, aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. Okay, this actually is another model that helps our people in DC or in Tallahassee or in Jacksonville or wherever we've got political folks making decisions on our economy. This does help them do that. All right, first off, grab out this sheet and we're going to take a look at it. We're going to go very basic. You know, first we got the vertical axis, that's our price index. Our horizontal axis, that's our output, that's GDP. And it's going to be very similar to this. The law of demand still works, the law of supply still works, and there's things that shift the curve, the demand curve, and there's things that shift the supply curve. Same concepts go with this aggregate demand model. But what we're doing is we're adding, instead of just doing demand, we're looking at what households, business, government, and the rest of the world do, and how does it affect supply on the GDP side. So this first curve here, which we normally associate with our demand curve, is actually our aggregate demand curve. Aggregate meaning total, and we have consumer, gross investment, government spending, net exports. We're talking about the total spending by the four teams in our circular flow diagrams. If you don't have that, pull that out too and put it on your desk so it's in front of you. Now what we're going to look at is, first off, what is going to cause this curve to shift one way or the other. So we're going to look at consumption spending. It starts out with literally consumer wealth. The wealthier we are, the more we're going to want. So our curve is going to shift depending on wealth. The stock market, we've lost about $3 trillion in wealth over the past couple of weeks. So we have really shifted that direction. When the Great Recession came, we lost $1 trillion in wealth. It shifted that direction. So we're not spending as much, or we don't have the amount of money to spend. So we'll go ahead and shift the other direction. But as it recovers and heads back the other way, the stock market goes up, our wealth is going to increase. Now the number one wealth grower for the middle class is a home. So home ownership is a big thing when you're taking a look at middle class wealth. Now consumer expectations can also shift this curve. If we expect bad things, it's going to shift that way. Like if you hear 24/7 on the TV, oh my God, the sky is falling, the earth is going, and we're all going to die, then what you're going to have is, well, are they right? Well, everybody keeps saying it. Maybe they are right. So even though you may be perfectly fine, you're going to go ahead and stop spending, start savings. So we're going to stop spending and we're going to shift this direction because of an expectation that the news folks gave us. Now they can go ahead and do it the opposite direction too, but in the current situation of 2020, they're more into doom and gloom. So they're trying to get us to think things are bad, or worse than they actually are. Now, household indebtedness always comes into play too, because we buy things and we buy things, and the curve shifts this way up to the point where we have to pay the credit cards off. When we're in that mode, all of a sudden it shifts this way because we're not buying anything more, we're not spending. And then of course there's taxes. The more taxes that are taken away from us, we're going to shift to the left because we're not going to spend as much. But the more money we keep in our pockets, in other words less taxes, we shift the other direction. Now, businesses, now here we are in gross investment, they take a look and they work on the concepts of interest rate and return on investment. Okay? Now, what do we mean? Well, interest rates. How much do I have to pay to borrow money? All right? We call that the cost of money or interest. And let's say it costs me 5% to go ahead. Now, the bank's going to charge me 5% interest on the loan that I'm going to make for, say, a new machine. Well, I then have to take a look at my return on investment, or in other words, how much profit am I going to make in this deal? So I'm looking at, I take a look at all of this stuff, the revenue I think I'm going to make, the costs they're going to make, and I'm looking at, I'm going to make a 10% return on the investment, which means after I pay off everything, I'm going to have 10% more left over. So do I make the deal or not make the deal? Well, yeah, because my cost of the money, the interest is 5%, and I'm going to get 10% back. So my return on investment is greater than the interest, so I make the deal. And just to make sure, it's greater than or equal to. Now we can go into a whole bunch of other stuff, but just suffice it to say for this basic economics class, greater than or equal to, we're going to go ahead and make the deal. The only time we're not doing it is if my return on investment is like 4.9%, then I'm losing more money than I'm making. So that's what I mean by interest rate return on investment. Now business has expectations also. If they think we're going into recession, they're going to stop buying. And all of a sudden, we shift this way. But if they go, hey, things are looking good, we're going to expand, we're going to shift this way. And of course, there's business taxes. Now remember, businesses never, ever, ever, never ultimately pay that tax, but they do have to pay it at the start. They got to sign that check and send it to Uncle Sam. And then they work on households on getting all that money back. But the more taxes that come on business, the more they shift this direction. Less taxes, they shift that direction. And then of course, technology. We can do it better, faster, and cheaper. Cheaper. Reducing the cost. We reduce the cost. The revenue stays the same, our profit grows, so we're going to shift this direction. If we have technology taken away from us, we're going to shift that direction. And then there's things called excess capacity. Remember, businesses build buildings, they go ahead and purchase capital, all that kind of stuff. Well, let's say we're in a recession. We used to have 5 plants working, now we only have 3. As we start getting better, we're in recovery. Before we buy new plants, we're going to bring these plants back online. So we're still not spending money. So excess capacity can cause us not to spend. Now government, basically it's just spending. If all of a sudden Congress just passes a bill to spend more money, we shift this direction. If they pass to do less money, they shift that direction, which I don't think I've ever seen them do. Then we have net exports. And basically, net exports are talking about conditions overseas versus conditions in the United States. If the other countries' economies are better, they're going to buy more stuff from us. If our economy is better than theirs, we're going to buy more stuff from them. That's a general kind of thing. So, we went through the 4 parts of demand. We went through these 4 in our expenditures formula to shift the aggregate demand curve. Now, the supply curve, it's harder to shift, but it's a little bit easier to follow. Because supply, remember, we're still looking at this production process. Here's our output right here. We're still looking right at this, and it doesn't look this way in the book, but if you read it, the book talks at it this way. We have 3 sections, and this is what we call the short-range aggregate supply curve. Remember, it's GDP. This is the supply side. Now, we got the demand side in there, and it will cross one of those 3 sections. So, taking a look at the 3 sections, the first is input cost, the resources, the stuff that first comes in. Domestic, the price is going up or down. Remember, all of those, the cost of our resources brings this higher, lowers this. So if the cost goes down, we get more of this, we're buying more domestic. If domestic is higher, we look overseas. But whatever it is, resource costs, whether it's domestic or imported, will shift our supply curve. And a lot of that also has to do with market power, and we talked about the concept of oil that used to go ahead and run us. It still does to a little bit, because of certain market things, but being energy independent gives us a lot more freedom to do stuff. Now the second part with businesses is changes in productivity. Remember the conversion part and the output part, doing it better, faster, and cheaper? That's where productivity change comes in. Now, productivity is looking at how efficient are we in producing goods and services. Are we inside the production possibilities curve, or are we close to being on it, or are we actually on it? Right? That's what we're looking for efficiency. And we measure it in two different ways. The first one is productivity equals total output number, in other words, how much we actually outputted, how much we made, divided by total input number, how many people, machines, that kind of stuff it took us to produce that amount of stuff. So it's one over the other, and it's specifically a number. Now let's say we had 10, we produced 10 things and it took us 5 people to do it. We got a output of 2. What does 2 mean? We have no idea, because it doesn't mean anything unless you compare it to something else. Now here's what I mean. Let's say our productivity is a 2, and we compare it to our nearest competitor, and their productivity is 1.5. Yay, we're better than they are. But we look at the industry average of all across the country, and we see the industry average is a 5, and we're a 2. So compared to everybody else, we stink. So we have to take a look at what we're comparing to. But we need to take a look at 2 measures, and the second one is the unit production cost. Now we're still using the total output number, but notice it's at the bottom this time. And instead of using total input numbers, we're taking a look at the cost of all of the resources we use. That's now on top. So remember, labor was $2 a labor unit. So we had total input, we had 5 people, each made $2 for that unit, divided by the 10 units that we made, 10 over 10, so each one, the per unit production cost, let's say it was this thing here, each one of these cost $1 in production. There's my cost. If I can sell it for $1.50, I made profit. If I can only sell it for 75 cents, I made a loss. All right, but that's what we're looking at. We have to look at both. Here's why. Okay? Let's say I become the manager of a production facility, and I come up with a great idea. I notice that we're paying our workforce $2 an hour, and on the radio coming into work, I heard about a workforce that I could get for $1 an hour. I go, wow, I can cut the cost in half. I take my per unit production cost, and instead of the $1 a unit, because now I'm only paying them $1 an hour, I could bring that to 50 cents a unit. I cut the cost in half. Now, of course, I'm firing these guys, I'm hiring these guys, because I showed my bosses, and the bosses said do it, and I reduced costs by 50% according to my papers that went into accounting, and I get a raise and promotion. Now you get promoted to run the factory. Now the problem is I fired all your experienced and trained workers. So these folks are all new to the job. They're not very experienced. They're definitely untrained. Who's going to produce less? The folks that just came into work. These guys. Now here's the problem. My productivity, now I'm using the productivity, not the per unit cost. The productivity fell to 1. It was reduced by 50%. Who gets the blame for it? Well, of course you do, because you're now the one running the plant. As a matter of fact, I may even come in, because I'm now the regional manager, and I may come in, why are you doing this? You went ahead and cut productivity in half, and I had this thing going, and it was just da-da-da-da-da-da. This person gets the blame. Whose fault was it? Yep, it was me. We need to go ahead and use both of them to see if something works. Right? Now our last one, legal and institutional environment. What does the government do? Do they give us taxes? Remember, taxes add more to this. Or do they give us subsidies, which adds more to this? That will shift our supply curve one way or the other. Okay. Now, here's an extra credit, 20 points. Ethanol, is it worth subsidizing? So, 1 to 2 page report. What I want is I want 3 pro articles, so these are different articles, 3 pro articles saying that we should continue ethanol. And in the bullet format. So this is why, and here's the 3 key parts that are going to go ahead and say yes, we should. Second paragraph, and don't forget to cite where you got it from at the bottom of that paragraph. Then you'll have 3 different articles cited as to why we shouldn't do ethanol. And cited at the bottom, same thing, the 4 bullet paragraph. And then paragraph number 7. In your opinion, we should or we shouldn't based on the research that you did. Okay? So, 20 points extra credit. Now, we also have government regulations. Regulations are estimated to cost businesses an extra $500 million, half a trillion dollars in productivity. In other words, they have to add all the costs to maintain the government regulations, all the lawyers, all the training, everything that goes with that is a cost that's above what's needed to produce the product. So, more regulations, more costs. Less regulations, less costs. So, here's your second extra credit, 20 points. Find out if we should or should not deregulate, or in other words, reduce regulations on businesses. Same format. 3 paragraphs for, 3 paragraphs against, and then the 7th bullet paragraph, your opinion. We should or we shouldn't based on your research. You can't base your opinion on what you think, you base it on your research, you base it on the facts. Alright, so here we have the 3 on one side, we have the 4 on the other. Now the thing about it is each of these color ranges are a little bit different. The horizontal range, constant price with changing quantity. In other words, the prices don't change. This area, this brown area here, is what we call the horizontal range, or the economy's in a recession. Okay? Remember this part? Raises prices? Well, we can't raise prices in a recession because nobody will buy anything. Why don't we raise prices? Because of this part here. This is what we call sticky prices. And I had a couple of questions on this one as we went through it in previous classes. Oops. Price wars. If you're in a recession and people start lowering prices to get more customers coming, you're already in reset. You're already in a recession. So the prices, you put them down too much, you're going to put them below what you're making and you're going to go out of business. So price wars, we don't want those. So that's one of the reasons why prices is harder to come down, because in a recession, people just aren't buying. Also, what they call menu costs. And the example that they that's easiest to use is think of going to one of those 5-star restaurants. Well, actually, I should say a 4-star restaurant. Because 5-star restaurants, they don't even put the prices on them. So if there's no price, it's kind of one of those, if you have to ask for the price, you don't belong there. So 4-star restaurant, they have prices on the menu. Now remember, 4-star restaurants, they're still kind of, the leather bound and the super plastic and the calligraphy form writing and all that kind of stuff that makes it look really, really cool. You open it up and you got to change the price on one product. Well, it's not like, the Waffle House where you go ahead and you write $25 on an orange dot, you put the orange dot over it. You have to replace every menu in the restaurant. Or in other words, it's more of a problem to change the price, or more of a cost to change the price, other than just leaving it there. Now, contracts. Well, a contract's simple thing. It's a legal document. You're stuck with it. You can't do anything more with the contract. You can also have a morale, effort, and productivity problem if you start reducing prices. We're in a recession. Price of the product's going down. People start going back and forth with their eyes. Is the company having a problem? If the company has a problem, am I going to be still kept on? Are they getting ready to let people go? Morale starts going down. People start looking for other jobs so that their effort isn't totally on what they're doing. And if the morale's down and the effort's down, you know productivity's down. So just doing that is going to have an effect on your workforce. And then, of course, minimum wage. You can't do anything if the raise goes up. You're stuck with what that wage is. Again, by law, instead of a contract this time between two people, now it's a government law that says this is what you have to do, and you can't do anything less. Even though less might keep more workers in the company. So we also have excess capacity in recession. Okay? Companies start shutting down plants, people get out of work, which leads to high unemployment, and we'll get to this later, what's called a full multiplier effect. That's the recession, or the horizontal range. The other bad guy is this vertical range, changing prices with constant quality. Well, why would prices continue to go up? Well, think about an auction house. You only have one item. You start bidding on that item. The price goes up, it goes up, it goes up, because there's nothing more you can do. It's only that one item. Remember, we said this is GDP. When we get to right here, we are now on that production possibilities curve for our country. We cannot produce anymore. So what we have starts costing more. The price, remember this is the price over here, starts heading that direction. That's the inflation zone. We don't want that one either. Okay? We are at full capacity. We are right there at GDP. We can't produce anymore. There is no multiplier effect. We cannot try to shift this way or anything like that because we're right there. We have no place to go. The middle part, we call it the intermediate range, changing price with changing quality or quantity. This is where the invisible hand works, right? You can call it by different things. I call it the invisible hand range. You could call it the market range, whatever it is. This is where the invisible hand is working, right here. If we have a surplus, we get rid of it. If we have a shortage, we get rid of it. The invisible hand is working there. It is not working in inflation and recession. And we are our own worst enemy. We're in a recession. We may have a job and guaranteed we're not going to get fired, but our neighbor gets fired. And then we hear Uncle Tom got fired. And we sit there and we go, oh, maybe I'm next. Because when it's us, we tend to be a lot conservative at what goes on at the house. So we start taking a look, can I afford stuff if I get fired? You know, well, maybe not right now. So we start saving, and we're spending less. So now we're making the recession even worse because we're not spending money to hire people so we can come out of it. And in the inflation zone, if you want electricity and it's August 1st here in Florida, and you have the money, you don't care if the electric price keeps going up, you're giving them the money. The problem is you are now making the price go higher, and then all of a sudden there's folks that can't afford the electricity because of the household inflation by some affects the others. So again, we're our own worst enemy, here and here. Here we just let the market go because the market's working fine. The idea being is if we're in inflation and we're in recession and households are our own worst enemy, this is where we want government to give us, kind of a quick nudge to try to get us to go this direction. And that's where we're looking at with this thing. All right? Changing price, changing quantity eliminates over or underproduction, shortages and surpluses, and the market nears full production. If it's working right, we should never get here because we'll have other opportunities and stuff. Meaning we may also have partial multiplier effect, and we'll talk about that later. So we got inflation, invisible hand, and recession. Equilibrium point. Okay? We say, well, wait a minute. We got equilibrium here. We got equilibrium here, but we can produce more. Well, let's go ahead and take it one more step here. This is what we should look like right now, but we still have that gap here. Well, here's where the long run aggregate supply curve comes in. It shows potential, what we should be doing, but it also puts in that 5% unemployment rate. So when we look at that, it ends up going straight up and down. Remember this 5% unemployment? Here's our long-range aggregate supply curve. That, the short range, and the aggregate demand curve, when they all hit up, that's where we are at equilibrium as a country. Remember we said that all of our policies are focusing on a 5% unemployment. So we get to 3.6, 3.5. We're still not here. We're still working towards, but we're not at inflation. So this is working. But this is theoretically where we're looking to be. It just happens that if you're under 5%, you're doing better. But if it heads towards inflation, then we may want to take something and go around it and do something else. So this is what your note sheet should look like right now. If you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and give me a call. And we'll talk more about this when we get into fiscal and monetary policy. And that's what we have for this section.